Welcome to LobbyComply Pod from State and Federal Communications, your source for lobbying, compliance, ethics, campaign finance, and election news from across the country.
Hello, my name is George Ticoras. I am the manager of International Research Services at State and Federal Communications. Briefly, I hope to share some impressions of the regulated lobbying world outside of the United States. I will do this by touching on some aspects of how lobbying is regulated and a sampling of those countries with some form of regulation. In the U.S., the federal government has regulated lobbying through laws and regulations, and these are different and separate from U.S. state lobbying laws. In turn, each state has its own rules for lobbying its public officials. And just like all 50 states in the U.S. have their own unique lobbying laws, different nations also each have different lobbying rules. Most nations in the world do not have legislation regulating the activity of lobbyists, but we'll touch on some that do. Canada is the most similar to the U.S., with each of its provinces requiring some sort of registration and reporting. After that, I'd submit Ireland is probably the most similar to the U.S. and Canada, and there's a good history behind why that is. In fact, the head of ethics and lobbying regulation at Ireland's registry, who ushered in the country's lobbying law, is actually a transplant from Canada. She used to work for the ethics commissioner in Canada. In the U.S. and Canada, registration is usually required for lobbying both the executive branch and the legislative branch of government. It's the same, for instance, in Ireland, in France, and in Germany. By comparison, in the United Kingdom, registration is required for lobbying the executive branch, but not the legislative branch. Compare that to Mexico, where lobbyists specifically register with the Senate if they are going to lobby with the Senate, and register with the Chamber of Deputies if they're going to lobby that body. Requiring reporting of lobbying activities, something common in the United States, is not quite the same in other countries having lobbying laws. Ireland requires reports every 4 months. The UK requires reports quarterly. Other nations, like Lithuania, don't have periodic reporting, but require the registration be amended for each additional lobbying activity. In Australia, activity reports aren't required, but confirmations that registrations are current are required twice a year. Mexico does not require reporting activity. Another common feature outside of the U.S. is more of a reliance on registrants adhering to a code of conduct, such as registered persons lobbying in Germany or lobbying the European Union. And while the majority of nations still do not have lobbying laws, reforms and initiatives are constantly percolating with countries that are considering regulations. For instance, both Malta and Spain are actively considering legislation for the creation of a national lobbying law. North Macedonia, which already had a lobbying law, updated its rules with a brand new lobbying law in 2021, which became effective in November of this year. And Ireland, which already has a pretty strong lobbying law, has legislation being considered right now that would greatly strengthen its regulatory powers and its powers of enforcement. The world of lobbying regulations is increasing outside of the U.S. at a very fast pace. State and federal communications intends to continue to monitor all of the international updates, changes, and new lobbying laws. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to LobbyComply Pod from State and Federal Communications. For more news, visit LobbyComply.com. To learn more about how we can guide you along the road to compliance, visit stateandfed.com. LobbyComply Pod is produced by Joe May and John Spondarelli.